A shell rips into the parapet. Tons of raw earth collapse onto the infantrymen's heads. Summer, 1944, Western Ukraine. The offensive has stalled in front of Hill 248. The air reeks of cordite, burnt motor oil, and torn flesh. Soldiers press themselves into the slurry of the shattered trenches. They try to merge with the terrain, clawing their fingernails into tree roots. The ground trembles. A constant vibration travels through their boots, hammers their knees, and echoes as a dull ache in their teeth. Angular silhouettes crawl out of the gray smoke. Heavy Tiger tanks and Ferdinand self-propelled guns are methodically crushing the Soviet defense. Wide steel tracks grind abandoned weapons and human bones into the wet topsoil. Cannons fire point blank at machine gun nests. The strong point is turning into a shooting gallery. The German crews move with confidence, arrogant, not even slowing their march speed. They know they are completely invulnerable. Anti-tank fire erupts along the ruptured front line. Gun crews frantically ram shells into the breaches. Fire, recoil, another shot. The sharp, dry clang of metal on metal echoes over the mangled field. Standard armor-piercing rounds bounce helplessly off the thick, sloped plates. Only whitish scratches of chipped paint remain on the gray German armor. The laws of physics are handing down an unconditional death sentence to the Soviet infantry. The dry arithmetic of ballistics is relentless. A standard AP shell can only penetrate 65 millimeters of armor. The nose of the oncoming tank is protected by 100 millimeters of Krupp homogeneous steel. Kinetic energy is utterly useless here. A direct hit is followed by the screech of a ricochet. A ricochet means immediate detection and death for the crew. A flash of return fire wipes the camouflaged gun and its crew into bloody dust. A flamethrower tank, a T-34 variant, is concealed in a deep revetment on the left flank. The camo netting is thick with gray dust and clumps of earth from nearby explosions. Inside the cramped steel box, the heat is unbearable. Scalding metal burns fingers. The smell of spilled diesel mixes with acrid sweat. The vehicle commander, Senior Lieutenant Viktor Volkov, keeps his face pressed against the rubber eye cup of the periscope. He watches the cold, methodical slaughter of his positions. The steel armada is relentlessly closing the distance. Volkov sees a Tiger's HE shell tear apart a neighboring trench. The earth geysers into the sky in a terrifying black fountain, scattering chunks of soil. Static crackles continuously in his headset. The airwaves are jammed with the screams of wounded platoon leaders and panicked reports. The radio spits out fragments of hopeless messages. 31, we're burning! Falling back to the woods! Hold the line! Stand your ground! Not a step back! Volkov says nothing. He dryly analyzes the movement vectors of the enemy machines. He gauges the speed of the wedge's advance. He counts the remaining meters to his own trenches. The radio operator swallows hard, his throat parched. His hands convulsively grip the machine gun's receiver. "Senior Lieutenant, sir, they're gonna steamroll us." The operator's voice breaks into a rasp. "Our armor can't touch them. We need to pull back now. They'll burn us alive right in this hole." "Stow the panic," Volkov snaps. "Wait for the order." "What order? In 3 minutes they'll be grinding these trenches under their tracks. We'll only scratch their paint with this gun. The shells are bouncing off like peas." "I said shut it. Watch the right flank." The radio operator turns away, teeth clenched until they click. The driver has a death grip on the control levers. His knuckles are white from the extreme tension. The engine is idling. The heavy vibration of the hull transmits the rhythm of approaching death
directly into their spine.
Suddenly, the icy, strained voice of the battalion commander cuts through the airwaves. "Volga 3, this is Birch. Stop the breakthrough, at any cost. Out." The radio operator rips off his headset with a jerk.
"This is pure suicide. They'll take us apart with direct fire in a second."
Volkov slowly turns to the crew. His face is gray with ingrained soot. His eyes are perfectly calm. There is no patriotic fervor or the despair of a doomed man in them. Instead, there is the cold calculation of an engineer who sees a catastrophically broken mechanism and is weighing the microscopic chances of survival. The mission must be done. The infantry is breaking. The front line is tearing at the seams. The German armored wedge is gutting the Soviet defense. Standard tank tactics would lead to the immediate destruction of the vehicle and crew in the first seconds of open engagement. Leaving the revetment for a frontal assault is tantamount to an elaborate suicide. Kinetics are dead. Shells won't penetrate that thick frontal armor even at point-blank range. Volkov returns to the battered periscope. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. The lead-heavy tank suddenly stops on the crest of a churned-up hill. The long barrel of the gun, with its massive muzzle brake, turns slowly toward the Soviet tank's camouflaged cover, like a predator stalking prey. The German gunner's optics caught a stray glint of sun off the vision slit. Tension compresses the stale air in the cramped cabin to the density of cured concrete. Seconds stretch into endless hours of waiting for the hit. Every dull thud of a heartbeat hammers in the crew's temples. The German machine freezes. The massive steel hulk towers over the shattered battlefield, blotting out the horizon. The exhaust pipes belch thick, bluish smoke from the revving engine. The turret finishes its traverse. The black, bottomless hole of the 88mm bore looks Volkov straight in the eye. The gunner takes his lead. The heavy metal breech clangs as it seats a shell. Death has finished its calculations and is preparing for a short lunge. Time is running out. Volkov jerks away from the rubber eye cup. The heavy barrel of the German gun is frozen 100 meters away. Time compresses into a short, metallic click. Kinetics are dead. The laws of ballistics dictate certain death. A standard AP shell won't take Krupp steel. The armor needs to be burned. Volkov drops to the dirty floor of the tank, littered with spent casings. Before the war, he was the chief engineer of a thermite welding shop in industrial Dzerzhinsk. He knows the yield strength of alloyed metal inside out. He remembers the exact melting points. His brain spits out dry figures. The standard issue fuel mix will just spread as a useless smoking smudge on the thick frontal armor. A factory shot will only blind the enemy's optics for a few seconds. What's needed is a localized hell. A chemical burn-through. Volkov rips the coarse tarp off the emergency chest. His fingers bloody the stiff iron latches. Inside, rows of captured German smoke canisters and blocks of Soviet pyrotechnic powder are packed tight. This is a direct ticket to a court-martial. Military regulations strictly forbid unauthorized modification of ammunition. The Special Department never forgives the destruction of government property. A field court-martial works much faster than enemy artillery. Volkov pushes aside thoughts of the firing squad. Death from an 88mm shell will come in 30 seconds. Death from a Chekist's bullet won't come until tomorrow. The choice is blindingly obvious. "Give me the wrenches," Volkov barks over the radio's crackle. The driver flinches. His hands are locked onto the steel levers in a cramp. His eyes dart feverishly. "Senior Lieutenant, sir, it'll blow instantly," the driver rasps. "We're sitting on a full barrel of gunpowder. We'll burn alive. The wrenches, now, or they'll grind us into the dirt. Do it." With a shaking hand, the driver passes over a heavy wrench. Volkov rips the lead seals off the flamethrower's pneumatic valves. High-pressure air hisses violently as it escapes into the cramped fighting compartment. The stale air is instantly saturated with thick vapors of gasoline, fuel oil, and burnt insulation. Breathing becomes physically painful. The loader cowers in the far corner of the turret in terror. He stares at the commander with wide, glassy eyes. The air in the fighting compartment becomes heavy, viscous. Every movement requires a colossal effort of will. Fear paralyzes muscles, but professionalism forces hands to work with mechanical precision. Volkov cold-bloodedly turns the interior of the war machine into a makeshift alchemy lab. He pulls out a captured bayonet. The cold blade slices through the thick cardboard casings of the German canisters with a dry crunch. Acrid white powder pours onto a dirty, oily rag. It's a powerful chemical oxidizer. Fine aluminum powder is added immediately. Then comes the most important critical component. Volkov pulls a tight canvas pouch from his tunic. Inside are coarse magnesium shavings. He traded for them from the battalion's aircraft mechanics exactly a month ago. He mixes the components right on his trembling knees. The hull vibrates continuously from nearby artillery strikes. The tank heaves on the sinking ground. A single wrong move will cause an instant detonation. A ton of fuel mix will turn the entire crew into charred ash in a millisecond. Volkov measures the perfect proportions of fuel and oxidizer purely by feel. There are no lab scales here, only the absolute muscle memory of calloused palms and the predatory instinct of a professional. Fuel, oxidizer, catalyst. He pours the lethal gray powder into empty steel casings. He packs the mixture tight with the wooden handle of a heavy hammer. The friction of the powder grains sounds like sandpaper on raw nerves. A deafening roar erupts overhead. Another German shell clangs off the turret of a nearby wrecked tank. The shockwave hammers their ears. Fine rust and flakes of dried paint shower down from the ceiling. Volkov ignores the outside world. His world has shrunk to the size of a brass casing. He carefully inserts the modified primers. The charges are ready. Now, he needs to recalibrate the nozzles of the powder-actuated flamethrower. Standard pressure won't push the thick, metal-saturated fuel mix the required distance. It needs a forced injection. The commander tears the skin off his knuckles, unscrewing a seized regulator nut. Motor oil mixes with thick, dark blood. The enemy armada outside continues its relentless advance. The clatter of heavy tracks merges into a single, monotonic hum. The earth groans under the weight of thousands of tons of Krupp steel. Volkov shuts the safety valve of the compressed air tank. He intentionally pushes the pressure gauge needle past the red line. The metal piping groans dangerously under the critical internal stress. The system is ready to burst at any second. The risk of self-detonation increases 1,000-fold. A large, heavy drop of salty sweat rolls off Volkov's grimy forehead. It falls slowly. The drop hits exactly on the exposed contact of the electric spark trigger. A sharp, dry crackle follows. The short circuit instantly throws a bright blue spark. Time stops completely. The hearts of all 3 crew members freeze in their chests. Breath hitches. The spark flares ominously and dies exactly 1 millimeter from the exposed primer powder of the modified shell. Silence presses on their ruptured eardrums with the weight of lead.
Death has passed them by again, barely brushing their faces with its icy breath. Volkov wipes away the remaining sweat with a dirty sleeve. He carefully slides the first lethal charge into the hot breech. The gun lock clicks shut, closing the steel trap. The snare is set. The air inside the fighting compartment thickens.
Oxygen is burning off rapidly. Breathing becomes physically painful. A dry, hard spasm tightens the throat. The flamethrower tank has turned into a stifling steel tomb. The machine sits frozen in a deep ambush on the flank of the shattered, shell-plowed height. A localized hell boils around them. Heavy HE shells tear the earth. Shrapnel shrieks as it shreds the dusty camo netting. The predatory angular boxes of German heavy armor crawl forward. They methodically close to effective firing range. The ground rhythmically shudders. Every movement of the multi-ton tracks transmits a dull vibration directly into the crew's bones. A chilling, clammy terror shackles their movements. Animal fear paralyzes strained muscles. The loader sits on the dirty floor, buried in casings. His hands shake violently. He clutches a spare shell tight. He understands the absolute hopelessness of the situation perfectly. Entering an open firefight against such armor means instant cremation. The driver's tendons hum from extreme overexertion. He has a death grip on the levers. His knuckles are white. His eyes never leave the narrow, dust-covered strip of the vision block. Senior Lieutenant Volkov doesn't take his eyes off the eyepiece of the commander's sight. The optics tremble slightly from nearby artillery bursts. A massive gray hulk grows inexorably in the crosshairs. The enemy's lead-heavy tank crushes the thin brush with a crunch. Wide tracks grind the soil into a uniform muddy slush. The long barrel of the lethal gun sways menacingly in time with the machine's movement. The German commander is absolutely certain of his total invulnerability. His machine is too much for standard Soviet calibers. He doesn't expect a strike from an inconspicuous earthen mound at all. He has no idea that a makeshift chemical death is locked in the barrel of the camouflaged gun. Volkov assesses the situation with the icy calm of a calculating engineer. The enemy's frontal armor is absolutely impenetrable. The sides are shielded by thick steel skirts. The only critically vulnerable spot is the narrow circular gap of the turret ring, the seam between the massive turret and the heavy armored hull. Hitting it from a distance is physically impossible. It requires a surgical, sniper-like shot at point-blank range. Direct fire contact on the verge of guaranteed suicide. The trap is built entirely on closing the distance to the limit. The Germans must be allowed to get close. "Range 200 meters, the gunner rasps. His sweat-slicked fingers convulsively grip the metal hand wheels. His voice breaks into a wheeze. "Senior Lieutenant, sir, we gotta hit 'em. They'll spot us. They'll burn us alive." "Wait," Volkov cuts him off in a steel, lifeless voice. "Hold the target. Don't twitch." The enemy armada continues its relentless advance. The sharp clatter of track pins hammers at their frayed, exposed nerves. The powerful engine roars, belching thick clouds of bluish smoke. The German driver slams the gear home. The dry metallic grind of the transmission is clearly audible through the thick armor of the Soviet tank. The distance is melting away. Death is closing in. It looks them straight in the eye through the lenses of the sight. 100 meters. The gunner breathes heavily, raggedly. Acrid sweat stings his eyes. He can't blink. "They're coming right for us! They'll see the mound!" "Wait. Keep the ring in the crosshairs. Not a sound." The lead tank suddenly slows down. The tracks screech against broken stone.
The turret begins a slow, inevitable traverse. The enemy commander has noticed the unnatural contours of the camouflaged cover. The dark, bottomless maw of the cannon turns directly toward Volkov's position. The tension in the cabin reaches a breaking point. Seconds flow like thick, sticky resin. A heavy, armor-piercing shell is about to strike. It will easily punch through the sloped armor, turning the crew into bloody mincemeat. "Driver, position 2, go!"
Volkov roars. The driver violently yanks the stiff steel levers. The engine screams at max RPMs. The machine jerks forward. The tracks tear out dry clumps of earth with a loud crunch. The tank leaps from its cover. The sudden maneuver throws off the German gunner's aim. A heavy enemy shell whistles through the scorched air. The lethal slug passes mere centimeters above the turret. A powerful shockwave hammers the armor. A deafening ring batters the crew's eardrums. The Soviet tank reaches its new firing position under a hail of machine gun fire. The distance closes to an absolute, suicidal minimum. 50 meters. The massive gray turret with its crudely painted cross completely fills the sight's eyepiece. Every metal rivet is visible. Deep scratches in the Krupp steel are visible. The thick weld of the turret ring is clearly seen. A perfect, defenseless target. "Fire!" Volkov's command strikes short. The gunner stomps on the stiff firing pedal. The heavy firing pin slams into the modified primer. The makeshift chemical charge flares instantly in the hot breech. Gas pressure hits the red line immediately. The barrel jerks back in a stiff, short recoil. The smell of burnt powder hits their nostrils. The modified shell howls out of the muzzle brake. It carries no useless kinetic energy. It carries an unstable, man-made hell. The shell covers the 50-meter distance in an imperceptible fraction of a second. The trajectory is perfect. The slug hits the narrow gap dead on. It slams directly into the seam between the heavy turret and the hull of the lead German tank. The charge doesn't penetrate the armor. It smashes into the steel weld. Only a dull, heavy metallic clang rings out. Impact. The armor held against the kinetic force. The slug is wedged in the ring. And then comes a second of absolute, ringing silence. The shot produced no visible result. The German tank didn't explode. The enemy turret froze. The gun is still pointed exactly at the Soviet machine. Air stops entering Volkov's lungs. The crew turns to stone in their seats. Time stops completely. The snare has snapped shut, but the homemade death mechanism has taken a fatal pause. Silence presses on their temples like a 100-pound weight. The lives of the entire crew hang by the thinnest of threads in the face of the approaching catastrophe. A millisecond shatters the ringing silence. A blinding white star erupts on the gray armor of the lead heavy tank. The makeshift chemical fuse works without a hitch. The thermite mixture eats into the seam of the turret ring. The temperature of the localized strike instantly skyrockets to 2,500 degrees. The physics of ultra-high temperatures take their ruthless toll. Krupp steel cannot hold. It loses its molecular strength in a single, fleeting moment. The alloyed metal changes its state of matter. The impenetrable frontal protection flows like thick yellow wax. Kinetics have stopped, but chemistry continues its destructive work. Arc welding has been moved from the factory floor directly to the battlefield. Blinding white flame cuts through the steel without the slightest resistance. Sparks of molten slag fly in all directions, igniting the dry, dusty grass. The molten metal finds microscopic gaps in the welds.
A river of fire punches a direct path into the enemy machine's fighting compartment. Scalding drops of lethal rain fall onto hydraulic drives and open powder charges. The German tank instantly turns into a roaring blast furnace. The stale oxygen burns off in a second. Internal pressure violently ruptures the bulkheads. Flame greedily devours the ammunition. The fire reaches the racks of high-explosive shells. A colossal volumetric detonation occurs. A dull, visceral thud violently shakes the earth. An explosion of immense power rips the thick armored hull apart from the inside. The multi-ton turret tears away from the ring with a clang.
A massive chunk of dead steel flies into the air, belching thick pillars of black, oily smoke. A powerful shockwave slams into the Soviet machine. The armor groans piteously, taking a hail of shrapnel. The flamethrower tank crew doesn't celebrate the victory. There is no time for human emotion. There is only heavy, grueling man's work. The conveyor belt of destruction is running at full speed. The men inside the scalding steel box act purely mechanically. Precise movements, calibrated to the millimeter, have completely replaced fear. "Target destroyed," the gunner states dryly. His strained voice is devoid of any inflection. He is already furiously cranking the steel handwheels, shifting the sight to the next machine. "HE, load," Volkov barks in a metallic voice. He doesn't pull his face away from the rubber eye cup of the commander's sight for even a fraction of a second. The loader rips open the hot side rack. His thick canvas gloves have long since scorched away from the steadily rising temperature. Bare fingers grab the heavy steel cylinder. The brass casing ruthlessly burns his unprotected palms. His back muscles seize in a painful cramp from the unbearable static tension. He turns in the impossibly cramped space of the fighting compartment. His elbow slams hard against the massive gun breech. Skin is instantly stripped away to the raw meat. Sharp pain drowns in boiling adrenaline. Thick, dark blood coats the dirty, hot metal. With a colossal effort, the loader rams a new, modified shell into the smoking bore. The heavy wedge lock closes with a dry, clanging sound, nearly severing the man's sliding fingers. "Ready," the soldier rasps. He falls heavily to his knees, gasping for the scalding air, poisoned by acrid powder gases. The burning, shapeless wreckage of the first heavy tank completely blocks the path for the rest of the column. The German formation breaks. The self-propelled gun following behind slams on its brakes. Wide steel tracks tear the dry soil with a terrifying screech. The enemy driver desperately tries to reverse. The massive armored superstructure begins to turn, slowly. The machine exposes its vulnerable flat side to the strike. It is the absolutely perfect moment for a second shot. Volkov cold-bloodedly catches the massive gray silhouette in the crosshairs of the optical sight. "Sight 40. Side. Fire!" The gunner stomps on the stiff pedal. Misfire. The heavy firing pin strikes absolute emptiness. The primer of the makeshift chemical shell is silent. The homemade alchemy has suffered a critical failure. The shell is stuck fast in the scalding barrel of the gun. The tension in the cabin instantly skyrockets beyond human limits. Precious seconds are slipping through their fingers. The jammed ammunition, with its unstable thermite filling, begins to heat up rapidly from the scalding walls of the breach. An uncontrolled detonation inside their own turret becomes a matter of a few short moments. Death has returned to the cabin. "Misfire!" the gunner rasps. His sweat-soaked hands frantically jerk the steel lever of the manual extractor. The breech is jammed tight.
A piece of brass, deformed by the heat, is wedged fast in the metal. Volkov immediately shoves the periscope aside. He grabs a heavy steel pry bar from the toolkit. A mechanical failure this crude demands nothing less than brute physical force. With a violent swing, the commander slams the iron bar against the jammed wedge of the gun's breech block. Bright sparks shower over his oil-soaked coveralls. One strike, another crushing blow. Outside, the enemy's self-propelled gun completes its pivot. The enemy's long barrel dips inexorably, centering its crosshairs on the Soviet machine's camouflaged position. They have exactly 2 seconds left to live. A third, desperate strike of the pry bar finally knocks the stubborn lock loose. The smoking, defective brass casing clatters onto the iron floor of the fighting compartment. A thick cloud of toxic white chemical powder spills onto the red-hot metal plates, instantly filling the cramped space with suffocating, acrid smoke. "Load!" Volkov roars, his voice completely drowning out the deafening drone of the straining tank engines from the enemy column. The wounded loader flings his battered body forward once more. He blindly fumbles for the next heavy shell. Fresh blood from his shredded hands slicks the smooth surface of the metal. He rams the round into the breech in one continuous, desperate motion. The breech block snaps shut. The lethal conveyor belt regains its broken rhythm. The gun is laid on the enemy-armored SPG once again. The distance remains the same, a deadly 50 meters. The gunner doesn't wait for the commander to repeat the order. His foot slams the firing pedal into the iron floor. The deafening crack of the main gun shatters their eardrums. The recoil throws the heavy breech back. A new dose of unstable chemical hell hurtles toward the target. War grants no time for a breather. Inside the Soviet machine, the relentless cycle of back-breaking labor continues. Eject casing, load new shell, slam the breech, fire. The air becomes completely unbreathable. The temperature inside the tank inexorably climbs toward 140 degrees. The men are hemorrhaging sweat and blood, choking on the poisonous fumes of the burning chemical reagent, yet they continue to methodically dismantle the advancing steel. Engineering precision and raw animal strength have fused into a single clockwork mechanism. Every crew member has turned into a soulless gear within a giant conveyor of destruction. Stopping this mechanism means instant death. The shockwave from the lead vehicle's detonation scatters the thick black smoke. The remaining heavy German tanks rapidly shake off the initial shock. The steel armada realizes where the threat is coming from. The illusion of invulnerability is shattered. Long 88mm barrels move in sync. Massive turrets turn toward the inconspicuous earthen mound with the heavy hum of hydraulics. The Germans shift their combat formation on the move, swinging their impenetrable frontal plates toward the Soviet tank's position. The hunters have found the ambush. The deadly carousel is picking up speed. Inside the OT-34 flamethrower tank, there is absolutely no air left to breathe. The temperature has surged past all conceivable limits. The air has turned into a searing, poisonous gas composed of cordite fumes, evaporating fuel oil, and toxic chemical smoke. The makeshift chemistry inside the fighting compartment is extremely unstable. Charges packed with magnesium shavings and captured powder are heating up from the scorching walls of the breech, and the spent brass casings scattered across the floor. The metal cylinders of homemade death are becoming unbearably hot to the touch. One careless move, one stray spark of static electricity, or a sharp jolt, and the entire crew will instantly vaporize in a flash of white flame. The risk of a cook-off increases with every passing second. The men are sitting on a massive powder keg with a short, smoldering fuse. "Target 2, right 30, rear, fire!" Volkov rasps. His throat is completely scorched by the caustic chemical vapors. His voice sounds like rusted metal scraping against glass. The gunner's face, slick with sweat, is glued to the rubber eyepiece of the sight. He executes the order mechanically, cranking the stiff handwheels with a sweaty, slipping grip. Fire! Recoil. The heavy breech spits out a smoking casing with a metallic clang. Another modified charge streaks toward the advancing enemy. The shell punches clean through the massive metal grates of the German machine's engine deck. The laws of chemistry override armor thickness once again. The ultra-high temperature melts the steel louvers.
Burning liquid magnesium pours into the powerful carburetor engine like an unstoppable waterfall. Fuel lines rupture from the instantaneous thermal shock. A viscous, all-consuming flame engulfs the engine compartment. A greasy, impenetrable pillar of thick, black smoke stabs into the gray Ukrainian sky. The machinery of war suffers another violent misfire. The second enemy machine turns into a stationary funeral pyre. The crew abandons the burning tank in a panic, only to be cut down immediately by the infantry's scything machine gun fire. But the rest of the armada keeps pushing. A third heavy tank catches the Soviet machine in its Zeiss optics. The German gunner ruthlessly stomps the firing pedal. A deafening roar tears through the air. A heavy armor-piercing slug shrieks through the superheated air. A blow of colossal force rocks the flamethrower tank. The metal groans in a pained, terrifying shriek as it absorbs the horrific kinetic energy. The crew is slammed violently against the scorching steel walls and angular breech blocks. A hail of razor-sharp iron scale and chipped paint rains down from the ceiling. "Driver, reverse!" Volkov bellows, spitting thick, salty blood from a bitten lip. The driver yanks the stiff control levers back with fury. The engine howls in agony, belching clouds of blue-gray exhaust. The tank jerks backward, slipping out of the follow-up aim, but the left side sags unnaturally. A horrific, loud grinding sound of tearing alloy steel rings out. The enemy's return shell didn't penetrate the frontal armor. It glanced off, gouging a deep furrow in the sloped plate, and struck the running gear directly. The idler wheel is shattered to pieces. Massive steel tracks clatter to the ground, ringing with sheared pins. The track splayed out helplessly across the muddy, cratered earth. The Soviet machine is paralyzed. "Track's blown! We're dead in the water!" The driver screams over the clatter of metal. His voice carries a chill of cold resignation. A stationary tank in modern maneuver warfare lives no longer than 10 seconds. They have become a perfect target, pinned to the dirt. The Germans assess the situation instantly. Another heavy armored beast crawls confidently from behind the smoking wrecks of its comrades. The distance is closing fast. The enemy turret methodically traverses onto the immobilized Soviet target. The German tankers prepare for a cold-blooded execution at point-blank range. There is no physical way to escape. Bailing out under heavy fire in open terrain is certain death. Inside the tank, the temperature reaches a critical, lethal point. Drops of sweat hiss as they evaporate off the red-hot armor. The charges in the racks are ready to detonate from a single, hard impact. "Load!" Volkov's command cuts through the thick, death-filled air like a ruthless whip crack. There isn't a trace of panic in it, only the dry fixation of an inevitable fact. They will take their last stand right here, without retreating a single millimeter. The loader peels the remaining skin off his bloodied palms. He snatches the last makeshift chemical shell from the scorching metal rack. The metal burns his hands savagely through the dead, blistered flesh. The soldier rams the unstable charge into the hot barrel with one precise, practiced motion. The wedge lock slams shut hard, nearly taking his fingers with it. The gunner doesn't wait for the commander's corrections. He slams his foot onto the firing pedal, aiming straight at the encroaching wall of steel. Fire. Another blinding flash of white thermite flame illuminates the battlefield. The modified charge bites into the base of the enemy turret with monstrous force. The chemical reaction instantly burns through the multi-layered seam of Krupp steel. Searing, molten metal sprays into the German tank's fighting compartment. It rains down directly onto the open powder charges prepared for the lethal shot at the Soviet machine. A shockwave of colossal power slams into the ravaged earth. The internal detonation of the massive ammo load tears the enemy machine into shapeless fragments. The multi-ton turret, with its mangled long barrel, is ripped from the hull with a horrific metallic shriek. It flies 10 meters into the air, flips heavily, and crashes onto the muddy ground with a dull, earth-shaking thud. Roaring flames howl out of the open neck of the ruptured hull. The mechanism of war has ground to a halt, choking on its own blood and steel. The battle lasts exactly 14 minutes. The second hand of the mechanical chronometer counts the time with absolute coldness and cruelty. In this microscopic sliver of eternity, the invincible German armada loses 5 of its newest heavy armored machines. 5 steel fortresses, forged in the factories of the Reich for total battlefield dominance, are transformed into blazing mass graves. The system suffers a critical, irreparable failure. The perfect offensive machine chokes on its own blood and molten metal. The German crews don't understand the physics of what is happening. They see their invulnerable protection melting from hits coming from an unremarkable earthen dugout. Thick frontal armor, capable of confidently withstanding a direct kinetic hit from any standard Soviet caliber, liquefies under the influence of makeshift chemistry. Uncontrolled panic surges through the enemy radio waves. Cold tactical calculation is replaced by animal terror of an unknown destructive weapon. The surviving tankers call it black magic. They break their disciplined combat formation. The perfect attack mechanism, honed on firing ranges, shatters into small pieces. The heavy machines begin to back away in a disorganized, blind rush. Drivers yank frantically at stiff control levers, ruthlessly abusing complex transmissions. Wide track belts screech desperately against the explosion-mangled soil. Dirt flies from under the treads. A massive steel behemoth on the right flank attempts an emergency pivot under continuous aimed fire. The enemy driver gives in to panic and makes a fatal mistake. He miscalculates the turning radius on the broken, crumbling ground. The multi-ton gray hulk tilts to its side. The left track completely loses its grip on the edge of a deep, sandy ravine. The tank collapses downward with a deafening metallic crash. The turret scrapes violently against the rocks, crushing the thin fenders and snapping the side skirts. The machine flips onto its roof, helplessly exposing the thin armor of its vulnerable belly. The remnants of the shattered tank wedge hastily retreat into a saving hollow. The enemy moves out of the kill zone. The offensive finally shatters against a localized thermal hell. Volkov doesn't pull his inflamed eyes away from the commander's panoramic sight. His face is tight with a hard crust of dried salt sweat and thick, oily soot. "Targets are retreating in the hurry," the gunner rasps dryly. His wet hands convulsively grip the steel handwheels of the sight.
His breathing is ragged and heavy. "Permission to fire on their retreat. We can catch their rears." "Ceasefire. The gun is critically overheated." Volkov's voice sounds hollow and monotonous, devoid of emotion. "Conserve the chemicals. Wait." They remain paralyzed inside their broken tank. The thrown track has bolted the multi-ton box to this churned-up height. Any movement from lurking enemy artillery or infantry could be fatal. The tension doesn't vanish, it simply changes form, turning into a thick, viscous weight for a second strike. War never forgives a lapse in vigilance. The crew continues to sit on a powder keg filled to the brim with unstable explosives. The homemade shells in the scorching racks could spontaneously detonate at any fraction of a second. The battlefield slowly sinks into a heavy, oppressive silence.
The deafening roar of cannon fire is replaced by the frequent dry crackle of burning metal and the dull thuds of ammo cooking off inside shattered hulls. Black, unnaturally thick smoke blankets the gray Ukrainian sky in a dense, impenetrable shroud. An unbearable stench of burnt diesel fuel, melted rubber from the road wheel tires, and charred flesh hangs in the stagnant air. The entire ground before their position is littered with twisted, dead metal. The pride of German engineering has been completely annihilated by the cold calculation of a Soviet chemist. The 88mm guns that once sowed death and panic are now hideously melted. Ultra-high temperatures have warped the perfect geometry of the thick barrels. They are bent like soft clay, staring helplessly into the scorched black earth. Armored plates are turned inside out by the monstrous force of internal detonations. Welded seams are ruptured. Massive road wheels have been torn from their torsion bars and thrown dozens of meters away. The iron tab for this brutal fight has been paid in full. "Keep your eyes peeled," Volkov spits through clenched teeth. He harshly wipes the optics with a filthy rag. "They'll definitely call in mortars. Don't change your sectors." "Copy that, Commander," the driver responds, his head dropping weakly onto the instrument panel. "Holding the line." Surviving a battle isn't the end of the dirty work. It's merely a brief pause before the next catastrophe. The trap served its lethal purpose, but the hunters themselves have turned into a stationary target. Relaxing is strictly forbidden. The air inside the armored box thickens rapidly. The oxygen has completely burned out. Its place is taken by a heavy, nauseating mixture. Toxic chemical smoke eats into the mucous membranes. Fumes of burnt magnesium tear savagely at their throats. The smell of red-hot alloy steel is permanently fused with the thick stench of human sweat. The OT-34 flamethrower tank is turning into a pressurized trap, filled to the brim with suffocating gas. The silence hits their eardrums harder than a high-explosive blast. The ringing in their ears drowns out the ticking of the cooling armor. The crew sits motionless. Adrenaline is draining fast from their blood. In its place comes a toxic, leaden fatigue. Muscles lose their tone. The soldiers' bodies go limp. No bravado, no shouts of joy. Exhausted men are simply trying to take their next breath. Volkov slowly pulls off his tanker's helmet. The movement takes immense effort. His hands shake with a fine, uncontrollable tremor. His fingers are locked in a painful cramp. His nervous system is drained to its absolute physical limit. His brain categorically refuses to process external information. They have just operated on the absolute razor's edge. One wrong move, one extra degree of temperature inside the breach, one defective German smoke canister, and they would have turned into a handful of gray ash on the iron floor. The civilian knowledge of a chemical engineer stopped the enemy armored wedge. The laws of thermodynamics saved their lives.
Formulas from a university handbook proved stronger than Krupp steel. But the price of this life-saving knowledge is scorched nerves. Volkov looks at his blackened palms. His skin is covered in deep burns and embedded grease. He methodically surveys the tank's interior. Scorched brass casings litter the floor. The metal still radiates unbearable heat. Remnants of the homemade thermite mixture smolder weakly in the dark corners of the fighting compartment. White toxic powder covers every square inch of space in an even layer. The instruments are coated in thick soot. The electric fan hums strainedly, but it is completely failing to clear the dense cloud of toxic gas. "Hatches," Volkov rasps. His voice sounds hollow and cracked. His vocal cords are severely burned by the caustic smoke. "Open them."
"We're going to suffocate."
The loader struggles to his feet on rubbery legs. He grips the massive steel handle of the turret hatch. The metal is scorching hot. The soldier grinds his teeth, ignoring the sharp pain of his burned skin. He heaves the heavy armored lid upward. The hatch is jammed. The deformation of the hull from near misses has permanently warped the steel hinges. "It won't budge, Commander," the loader wheezes. He throws his entire weight against the handle. "Stuck fast." The driver silently leaves his post. He pulls himself up by his arms, standing shoulder to shoulder with the loader. Two exhausted men slam their shoulders into the thick steel in unison. One hit. Another violent shove. Brute physical force works against the mangled metal. The hatch gives way with a loud screech. The heavy lid clatters back with a metallic bang. A rush of gray air, saturated with cordite fumes, surges into the fighting compartment. But right now, it feels absolutely pure. The crew gulps down oxygen greedily, convulsively. Their lungs burn like fire. A heavy, hacking cough begins. The toxic smoke slowly and reluctantly drifts out of the steel box. The gunner slumps down weakly. He simply falls back onto the hot transmission cover. His filthy coveralls are instantly soaked in machine oil. His eyes are completely glassy. His face is gray and drawn. He stares at the turret ceiling with a meaningless, empty gaze. "Alive," the driver states dryly. He wipes away filthy sweat with the back of his hand, leaving a wide, black streak across his face. "Pulled it off by a damn miracle." "Luck is for fools," Volkov answers flatly. He remains motionless in the commander's seat. "Chemistry pulled us through, and the right oxidizer ratio." "I thought we were going to burn up right here," the gunner whispers, his eyes never leaving the iron ceiling. "When that casing jammed tight, I was done. I was ready." "Thinking isn't your job," Volkov cuts him off harshly. "Your job is to stomp that firing pedal on time." The conversation dies instantly. There are no more words. There is no point in talking anymore. The psychological limit has been completely breached. They executed an impossible order to the letter. They stopped a heavy armor breakthrough. They destroyed the enemy's cutting-edge tech with makeshift charges worth a few kopecks. But right now, none of that matters. All that matters is the cold air rasping into their lungs. All that matters is that the heart continues its rhythmic beat inside the chest. Volkov pulls a badly crumpled cigarette from his breast pocket. His fingers mechanically crush the dry tobacco. He flicks a trophy lighter. A weak flame illuminates his haggard face. A deep drag. Acrid tobacco smoke displaces the remnants of the chemical fumes from his lungs. He looks closely at his men. They are breathing. That is the only dry result of the last 14 minutes of combat. Toxic fatigue breaks their bones.
It drains the last energy from their strained muscles. The loader sits on his haunches, staring blankly at his mangled hands. Large blisters from severe burns are already starting to pop, weeping clear fluid. The pain will come a little later, when the adrenaline block finally wears off. Right now, he is just a piece of living flesh programmed to load heavy cylinders into a gun breech. The biological mechanism has performed its function. The mechanism requires immediate cooling and a long rest. Beyond the shattered tank, a heavy, dead silence reigns. It feels unnatural and frightening. Only the wind chases acrid cordite smoke across the field, which is pitted with deep craters. 5 black, charred enemy wrecks continue to smolder heavily in the distance. This is the direct result of cold professionalism. This is the outcome of dirty, grueling work performed without the slightest hint of illusory heroism. The right action always yields the right result. "Check the ammo racks," Volkov commands dryly.
His voice is devoid of inflection. It's just another line in a long mental checklist of survival instructions. "Toss out all the duds, now, before the techs get here." "On it," the loader responds, lifelessly. He slowly peels his heavy body away from the hot armor. Every action now requires a colossal effort of will. The soldier begins to methodically sort through the remains of the makeshift chemical arsenal. Several casings have been severely deformed by the extreme temperatures inside the fighting compartment. White powder has spilled thick onto the floor. The lethal threat still lingers inside the paralyzed machine. The loader gathers the ruined charges and tosses them out one by one through the open turret hatch. The metal cylinders thud softly onto the soft, explosion-churned earth. The tank cools slowly. The alloy steel clicks rhythmically as it contracts from the sharp drop in temperature. The deadly threshold has been crossed, but the local war is not over. Suddenly, the roar of a powerful car engine violently cuts through the ringing silence. A dusty off-road vehicle speeds up to the side of the crippled tank. Immediately behind it, a car from the Counterintelligence Special Department screeches to a halt. Doors slam. Harsh, peremptory commands ring out. The war for survival is over. The paper front begins immediately. The damp dugout of the battalion headquarters reeks of cheap tobacco, moldy pine needles, and stagnant human sweat. Murky groundwater drips continuously from the low ceiling made of thick logs. Cold drops shatter against the filthy plank floor with a dull thud. A dim kerosene lamp casts jagged, twitching shadows against the uneven walls. Senior Lieutenant Viktor Volkov stands perfectly straight in the middle of the cramped room. His face is covered in a thick, ingrained mask of grease, gun soot, and dried blood. His filthy tunic, torn at the elbows, is saturated through with toxic chemical smoke. He breathes heavily and raggedly. Every breath echoes with a dull pain in his scorched lungs. The muscles in his back are locked in an agonizing cramp from the recent overexertion. Sitting across from him is the Smersh counterintelligence investigator, Captain Odinsov. The officer's tunic is perfectly pressed, not a single stray wrinkle. His polished chrome boots gleam dimly in the dugout's gloom. Neatly stacked sheets of paper lie on the crude table made of unplaned boards. Beside them rests a mangled brass tank casing, pried open with a tin opener. It is physical evidence, a direct, smoking gun, a one-way ticket. "Destruction of government military property." Odinsov's cold, emotionless voice methodically cuts through the thick silence. "Willful damage to state property during wartime, plus unauthorized modification of standard-issue ammunition in a combat environment. This is direct sabotage, Senior Lieutenant." The counterintelligence officer slowly raises his eyes to the tank commander.
There isn't a trace of hatred or sympathy in his gaze. What moves behind those eyes is a flawless, ruthless, bureaucratic machine. A machine that possesses absolutely no understanding of the mechanics of survival on the front lines. It operates exclusively by the rigid letter of military regulations. You turned the T-34 combat vehicle entrusted to you into a makeshift powder keg, Odintsov continues, his words falling like rhythmic axe strokes. You exposed the entire crew to a deadly, completely unjustified risk. You flagrantly violated the command's direct ban on unauthorized field experiments with unstable chemicals. Do you understand the consequences? Volkov is silent. He stares straight ahead. The image of thick Krupp armor melting still flickers before his bloodshot eyes. The deafening roar of exploding German ammo racks rings continuously in his concussed ears. I destroyed 5 of the enemy's newest heavy vehicles, Volkov rasps. His voice creaks like an ungreased tank tread. His throat is scorched raw by the acrid fumes of burning magnesium. A standard armor-piercing shell won't penetrate the enemy's frontal armor even at 50 meters. Kinetic energy was useless there. The laws of ballistics failed. So, I applied a chemical reaction. Localized, directed heating up to 2,500 degrees. The physics worked perfectly. The objective to hold the line was achieved. The enemy's armored wedge is shattered. The infantry is saved. Odintsov stands up abruptly. The heavy wooden stool skids back against the log wall with a harsh scrape. With a sharp motion, the captain picks up a mangled brass casing from the table. A thin stream of white powder from a captured smoke canister spills directly onto the neat headquarters documents. Objective achieved? The security officer's voice hardens into leaden steel. Your makeshift chemistry is critically unstable. Technical expertise confirms an extreme risk of accidental detonation. One careless bump, one direct hit from a small fragment to the turret, a stray spark from bad wiring, and your tank would have vaporized along with your men. That is a guaranteed ammo rack explosion. The threat of a field court-martial becomes physically tangible. It weighs on the tank commander's slumped shoulders heavier than a multi-ton turret. At the front, victors are judged. They are judged quickly, harshly, and ruthlessly. The firing squad operates with the precision of a well-oiled assembly line. No acquittals are handed out for such violations here. You are not a civilian engineer in some rear echelon laboratory, Odintsov barks, emphasizing every word. You are a combat vehicle commander. You are required to act strictly according to approved instructions. You had absolutely no right to mix thermite compositions on your lap in a cramped fighting compartment under heavy enemy fire. This is criminal negligence. Volkov doesn't look away, his gaze heavy and bloodshot. He withstands the security officer's pressure with absolute calm. Extreme exhaustion has blocked out all fear. A man who has survived a private hell inside a red-hot steel box stops fearing paper threats and the shouting of rear-echelon brass. Regulations are always written in blood, Captain. But sometimes they are written in someone else's blood, in safe, warm headquarters offices, Volkov says evenly. My crew was doomed. The standard shell left only minor scratches on the enemy armor. The choice was simple. Burn alive without a single chance to damage the advancing enemy, or flagrantly violate a sterile manual and burn them first. I chose the second option. My men are alive. The enemy tanks are smoldering in the open field. Everything else is of no practical consequence. The words fall heavily, like hot spent casings on an iron floor. This is a brutal, head-on collision between two incompatible worlds. the world of trench-bred ingenuity, where survival depends on the speed of unconventional thinking and a total disregard for rules. And the world of strict, iron order, where even the slightest deviation is punished by death in the name of the system's integrity. Odintsov slams his clenched fist onto the rough wood of the table. The dim kerosene lamp jumps threateningly. The yellow flame flares, catching the counterintelligence officer's face, twisted in cold fury, out of the darkness. "A field court-martial will decide what matters," the investigator barks. "Your criminal amateurism threatens the discipline of the entire tank battalion. If every commander starts filling shells with German powder and aluminum dust, the regular army will turn into an uncontrollable pack of suicides. You consciously risked the loss of expensive combat equipment. You flagrantly violated your military oath." The security officer takes a short, sharp step forward, coming out from behind the table. The distance closes to a minimum. The tension in the damp, moldy dugout reaches a critical limit. The stale air sparks. At any second, the situation could spiral out of control. The interrogation is escalating into a confrontation on the verge of drawn weapons. "Surrender your sidearms, Senior Lieutenant Volkov," Odintsov orders in an icy tone that brooks no argument. "You are officially relieved of command. You are under arrest pending the decision of the court-martial. Pistol, on the table, now. Follow the order." Volkov slowly, very slowly, lowers his right hand to the heavy leather holster on his grime-streaked belt. Fingers covered in blisters from chemical burns rest heavily on the worn flap. A dead, ringing silence hangs in the dugout. Only the heavy, raspy breathing of two irreconcilable enemies can be heard. The monotonous drip of water from the ceiling counts down the final seconds before the breaking point. The security officer's face turns to stone. His right hand shifts imperceptibly toward the unfastened holster on his own belt. Any sudden movement from Volkov will be interpreted as armed resistance. A shot in the confined space would be deafening. The hero of the day stands 1 millimeter away from an ignominious death at the hands of his own side. The bureaucratic machine is ready to chew up and spit out the man who just saved hundreds of lives. The system does not tolerate glitches. It demands blind obedience. Volkov's fingers freeze on the cold metal clasp of the holster. Time stands still. The deadly work of the battle is finished, but the real price for survival is only beginning to be paid. The heavy oak door of the dugout swings wide with a deafening crack. The rusty iron hinges shriek. A sharp gust of cold wind bursts into the stale air, thick with cheap tobacco and animal fear. It carries the scent of damp earth, spilled diesel, and distant gunpowder smoke. A massive figure, the regimental commander, appears in the doorway. His canvas raincoat is soaked through by the rain. Thick, black trench mud drips from the hem. Heavy combat boots leave deep, wet tracks on the dirty plank floor. He crosses the threshold and instantly reads the room. He sees Volkov's tensed hand on his holster. He sees the security officer's unfastened belt. The veteran's eye pinpoint accurately fixes the deadly short circuit between trench truth and rear echelon instructions. "Stand down!" The colonel's voice hits like a heavy artillery shell. It carries the absolute authority of the front lines. The command instantly paralyzes both officers. The tension grinds to a halt, reversing polarity. Captain Odintsov snaps to attention. The bureaucratic machine misfires, colliding head-on with direct military authority. With a practiced gesture, the investigator smooths a crease on his tunic. Comrade Colonel, this officer is accused of intentional damage to state property and plotting sabotage. The security officer begins, reciting the reinforced concrete paragraphs of the military code. The risk of self-detonation. I said stand down, Captain. The regimental commander takes a heavy, sweeping step forward, physically crowding the counterintelligence officer away from the table. Leave your execution manuals for rear echelon inspections. A different arithmetic works here. The commander rips the wet cap from his head and slams a fresh combat report onto the table. The thick paper lands right on top of the mangled brass casing and the scattered white powder. The physical action crudely interrupts the verbal accusation. A hard fact breaks the logic of the court-martial. Senior Lieutenant Volkov flagrantly violated a direct command. He unilaterally modified munitions. It was a deadly risk to the entire regiment's ammo supply. Odintsov doesn't back down. His voice hardens like lead. He demands total submission to the system. The threat of arrest still hangs in the damp air. The regimental commander slowly turns to the investigator.
The veteran's gaze presses down heavier than a tank tread. He has been through the meat grinder of the retreat and knows the true price of a tactical decision. This exhausted man violated your dry paper manual, the commander rasps, pointing a dirty finger at Volkov. But he held a strategic defensive line. His makeshift shells cost exactly 100 rubles apiece, little more than a pack of cheap cigarettes. With those dirt-cheap, unstable charges, he just destroyed 5 of the enemy's newest heavy tanks. He turned millions of Deutschmarks worth of equipment into molten scrap metal. The blow hit the mark. Odintsov clenches his jaw. The fact of the destruction is indisputable, but the state machine demands punishment for insubordination. This is a direct violation of regulations, the captain repeats stubbornly, drumming his fingers on the table. He consciously risked the state-owned vehicle entrusted to him. He saved 1,200 of our infantrymen, the regimental commander roars. The blast of his voice shakes the log ceiling. The kerosene lamp flickers. 1,200 soldiers! My rifle battalion was supposed to be wiped out in this Ukrainian mud. German tracks would have ground them into the dirt in 10 minutes. That armored wedge would have punched through the entire division's defenses. But they are alive. The enemy has retreated. The arithmetic of survival is crystal clear. Victors are not judged. Victors are issued new ammunition and given new objectives. Volkov remains motionless. His burned hand slowly slides off the leather holster. His spasmed muscles relax. The acute crisis has passed, but the toxic exhaustion remains. He waits, hollow, for the final verdict. He understands perfectly. The system will never fully admit defeat. It will always find a harsh compromise. The regimental commander shifts his gaze to the haggard tanker. The aggression leaves the colonel's face, replaced by the hard pragmatism of a commander. Your trench alchemy worked, Volkov. The laws of chemistry defeated invulnerable steel, the veteran says evenly. But the captain is right about one thing. Your chemical tricks are critically unstable. 1 extra degree of temperature in a closed breach, and they'd be scraping your crew up in charred pieces for half a mile. The army doesn't need mass accidental suicides. The commander picks up the folder containing the security officer's report and pulls a grease pencil from his pocket. Front Command is classifying your combat experience as top secret. Every word falls like a lead stone. Any field experiments with thermite and magnesium are strictly forbidden from this second. Officially. Any attempt to replicate this modification will be punished by court-martial. The technology is too dangerous for mass use.
This powder keg will inevitably explode in our own hands. The experience goes into the archives under the seal of absolute secrecy. A paper barrier seals off the breakthrough. A brilliant engineering solution is sent into oblivion to preserve the stability of the system. It is a cold, calculating order, a ban on dying from one's own experimental weapon. Volkov nods silently. He is a professional engineer. He understands the logic of probabilities. The failure rate of homemade thermite would lead to catastrophic losses. He was simply lucky. A mathematical miracle cannot be scaled to a production line. Turn in all defective canisters to the technical service, Senior Lieutenant. The regimental commander signs the report with a flourish and snaps the folder shut. There will be no court-martial. The execution is cancelled. Your vehicle is to be sent for a deep overhaul immediately. The colonel takes a short, heavy pause. He pulls a small red box from his inner pocket and places it on the edge of the table. For successfully holding the high ground and destroying the enemy's lead armor, you are officially recommended for the Order of the Red Banner.
The entire crew will receive awards. You are dismissed. Go carry out your mission. Volkov feels no joy. A ringing emptiness pulses in his chest, a burnt field after a fire. Having risked everything, including his honor and his men, he received a piece of enameled metal on a ribbon. This is the ultimate justice of a brutal war. A dry, emotionless accounting balance. Soldiers' lives were exchanged for the enemy's death. A firing squad was replaced by a medal. The engineer turns on his heel and walks out of the stifling dugout into the icy Ukrainian night. The war is over. Echelons spit out thousands of surviving soldiers onto the platforms of ruined stations. Viktor Volkov returns to industrial Dzerzhinsk. He takes off the uniform smelling of blood and fuel oil and puts on the thick shopcoat of a senior engineer. The spacious, bright floor of a chemical plant replaces the cramped fighting compartment of a tank. But the old reflexes remain. His movements are precise to the millimeter. His cold gaze constantly scans for hidden threats. The war has seared into his nervous system an absolute readiness for catastrophe. Decades of peaceful labor pass. The plant increases its capacity. The rhythmic thud of stamping presses distantly resembles the artillery cannonade on an unnamed height. The air is thick with the acrid smells of oxidizers, machine oil, and red-hot metal. Volkov maintains a deep, cold respect for fire until the end of his days. He knows the price of a mistake. Fire never forgives weakness or a second of inattention. Fire obeys only the laws of physics and chemistry. Another production shift draws to a close. Routine work is underway in the thermite welding shop. Suddenly, a mechanical failure occurs. An overhead bridge crane jerks a multi-ton steel beam. The massive iron hook breaks loose with a terrifying screech. The beam crashes onto the concrete floor with a deafening thud. A shockwave knocks a young worker off his feet. Sparks from a severed high-voltage cable shower down onto open reservoirs of flammable lubricant. A fire breaks out. Tongues of flame lick up the spilled oil. The temperature rises. The workers freeze, paralyzed by a fraction of a second of animal fear. Volkov doesn't waste a second on emotion. He acts mechanically. Muscle memory kicks in faster than thought. Survival experience takes over. "The breaker! Cut the power!" the old engineer commands, his voice devoid of panic.
His clipped tone cuts through the wail of the factory siren. "Sand on the fire! Shut the oxygen valves! Now, move!" The young foreman frantically jerks the lever. The current stops. The arc dies. Other workers grab shovels, smothering the flames with dry quartz sand. The incident is resolved in 40 seconds. The catastrophe is stopped at the earliest stage. The mechanism of destruction failed thanks to precise action. Volkov slowly approaches the pale young man. This is his grandson, a recent graduate of a technical institute, the heir to his engineering thought. The boy is breathing raggedly, adrenaline still coursing through his trembling hands. "Grandpa, it just went up. It shorted out instantly," the grandson rasps, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I didn't even have time to react. I thought the whole shop was going to blow." Volkov looks the young specialist in the eyes. There is no softness in that piercing gaze, only a grim, uncompromising professional analysis. "Fear is a natural reaction to a threat," the veteran rasps, leaning on a metal handrail. "But a trained mind allows you to take that fear apart into small gears. You must do this before the moment of total catastrophe. Do you understand me?" "I understand. Break the emergency down into factors. Eliminate panic." "Exactly. Remember that forever. Against any heavy sledgehammer, there is always a calculated chemical or physical counter."
Against any impenetrable Krupp steel, the melting point and the correct load of reagents work without fail. There are no hopeless situations, only a lack of knowledge or a fatal lack of time for sober analysis. They walk slowly along the row of lathes. Bright sparks from arc welding illuminate the aged face of the former tank commander. In those blinding white flashes, the ghosts of burnt German tanks come alive for a brief moment. But now, this fire is controlled. It works for creation. The deadly element is locked into mathematical formulas and technological processes. Heroism on the battlefield is almost always a consequence of a lack of choice. It is the result of a tactical error that the rank and file must fix at the cost of their lives. True valor lies in something else, in dry, monotonous professionalism, in the ability to know the properties of metal at the molecular level, in the capacity to calculate the proportions of oxidizer and fuel, in the readiness to do one's heavy work to the end, despite total exhaustion. The grandson listens intently, soaking up every word. He inherits this legacy of the mind. The engineering dynasty continues. The young man picks up a protective welding mask and pulls on his canvas gauntlets. The preparation of the workspace proceeds with pedantic precision. Every movement is calculated. Every action has a logical reason and a practical consequence. No rush, no unnecessary emotion. "Temperature range checked," the grandson reports, lowering the dark shield. He perfectly mimics his grandfather's professional tone. "Working flux composition meets the standard. Cylinder pressure normal. Ready to weld the overhead seam. Begin work. Keep the tungsten arc steady. Control the weld pool. Don't flinch," Volkov replies curtly. The electrode makes contact with the metal. Another blinding flash of white light cuts through the gloom of the factory shop. Liquid steel evenly fills the joint between the plates. The old soldier's legacy lives on in the rhythmic hum of the welding machine. The experience of survival has transformed into a tool of creation. The transfer of knowledge is complete. Fire is subdued by the engineer's will.